And we're back with writer-director Noah Hutton of Lapsis. Why don't we start at the beginning, Noah? Where did the story come from for this film, and what made you want to tell it?
Yeah, well, it comes from, mysterious places, things trickle in. But I would say that we always thought of the kind of like parallel present that this film operates in. It's not exactly our world, but it's kind of like our world. I hope people recognize things that they, see in the news or feel about the world that they live in and their own labor represented in this film. But I guess the genesis of like the world of Lapsis, it came from an academic essay I read by an artist and academic named Patricia Reed. And she basically, the essay was called Logic and Fiction. And she basically laid out this case that the world we live in, the financial sector particularly, is a very abstract fiction. And if you just poke one piece of it, like what happened in 2008 and kind of what we saw this year too, the whole thing can topple over, which tells you that we are sort of living inside some kind of absurdist fiction that we all accept, we take it for granted. And I thought that to me felt like a very pregnant space to invent a world that also feels somewhat absurdist. If you really think about this world of Lapsis with the box, the metal cubes and the cabling,
Right.
There's something absurd about it, but yet it feels recognizable. And I was interested in exploring that space. Why is it that so much of the toil of our lives and the labor we do, if you really like think about it for a second, has an absurdist quality to it? And so that was the genesis of the world and the kind of like sci-fi satire that we were going for.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. You also have a background in documentary filmmaking. Can you tell us a little bit about that and like what made you want to switch to narrative for this as opposed to documenting the current absurdism that we're in right now?
Yeah, no, I do have that background, but I think that I love making documentaries, and I have a new one coming out soon. But there's something that I think fiction filmmaking can do. It sort of hits a different part of the brain. Maybe it allows you to explore and mostly model something that you're interested in modeling for an audience, and exploring for yourself, modeling for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, I think the sort of back half of our film models what could happen to an individual if they get swept up in some kind of collective action moment that is in response to that absurdism of the world. So as much as I love documenting people who are doing activism or who are changing the world in documentaries, this allows for a sort of a different angle at modeling what change could look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Another aspect of your background that I found really interesting is your scientific background, that you studied neuroscience and you did this thing in New York called Brain City. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Yeah, so the new documentary I have coming out, it's called In Silico, and it's a 10-year story about a scientist in Switzerland that's been trying to reverse engineer the human brain on supercomputers for a decade now. And so the project in Times Square, Brain City, took some of the imagery that's come out of that project, as well as imagery from some of the 4 or 5 other leading neuroscience labs in the world, and created a 3-minute fly through kind of the brain that was simultaneously put on all the billboards in Times Square at midnight every night for a month. Everything, all the advertisement would shut down, and the brain imagery would play. And I guess there was, it is kind of dazzling, but there was a second level I was hoping for there, which is that a lot of the imagery that comes out of projects like this is in a way advertising for them to continue doing their work. So there's a slight critique there in a way, I think, too.
Sure. But it also reminded me, or made me think of Lapsis itself, with the connectivity of the cables and the boxes. And is that kind of what you were going for within the park, of that being almost like a scalable model of a brain, than how it's all connected?
Yeah, that's true too. There was we were drawing analogies between the urban landscape and the brain landscape. That was definitely part of it. So it starts with like a grid of New York City, and then that grid becomes a grid of connections in the brain. And so you're picking up on something that was absolutely in Lapsis too, which is the whole world of Lapsis is sort of like plastic and neural in a way. You have box nodes being rewired all the time, and there was definitely a metaphor there that I think was across both projects.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seemed like a physical shoot that there was a lot. I mean, just the laboring of the guy, your main character, he's kind of a heavy set guy, like hunking around the woods. Could you talk a little bit about the shoot itself, like shooting in the woods? And also I'm interested to hear if like the robots, were those like breaking down I assume, were those actual robots that you built, or was that all CGI?
Yeah, no, there's no CGI in the film. It's all
Yeah.
practical effects. And the robots, we wouldn't have been able to make this film on the low budget that we had if we had to construct, fabricate robots ourselves. We actually were given by the University of Pennsylvania a robotics lab there, a COD lab. They sent 3 students and made it an academic project from their lab. And so that was super lucky because they came and they controlled the robots on set. They wanted to see what it would be like to apply their robotics research to a film shoot. And we wouldn't be able to do it without that. So that was lucky. But yeah, the shoot itself otherwise was very difficult, very physically intense. Dean Imperial, who plays Ray, is not someone who like camps and is used to the outdoors. I wrote the film really for him, very much because of that too. I had a feeling like getting Dean out of New York City and into the wilderness would be interesting, like on a documentary level. So that definitely, I think, worked in our favor. And he was really a great sport about it too. He's in almost like every shot of the movie.
Yeah.
But it was a hard shoot, and we were lucky with rain. If we had been rained out, we would have been really messed up. So we had a lot of luck work in our favor.
And where exactly was the shoot? Where was the location?
Look, we shot it all in upstate New York in Putnam County, near Brewster, New York, if anyone's familiar. And a lot of it's on state park land, but also a lot on private land that we got access to. When they walk into the park entrance, that's one of the parks that we shot at a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So one aspect of the film that I feel we kind of already covered is the AI and the interconnectivity and all of that. But the other big aspect of it is this satire of the gig economy and, treating workers like they are robots or in this, very rudimentary fashion. What is your critique or your message to the gig economy that you're trying to get out of Lapsis? And do you think there is a future, or what do you see as the progression of the gig economy?
Yeah, I think I certainly have a message and a feeling about the gig economy, but I want this film to not just be thought of as a critique of this one sector of our economy called the gig economy. I personally have never worked in the gig economy, but I actually felt like much of the labor I have done as a freelancer, independent contractor in the last decade, I've been a working person, has felt like the labor we see in Lapsis. I think all sorts of freelancers, independent contractors these days are being treated more and more like the perilous laborers of the gig economy, in that there's a lack of basic protections, a social safety net. And so my critique of the gig economy, I think, is writ at large a little bit these days, with corporations getting rid of full-time labor in favor of independent contractors. But the critique really is that if automation continues to rise, like it will inevitably, it's not that the technology itself is bad or that robotics is going to be, it's going to be humans versus robots. It's that part and parcel with developing those sectors of the economy, you have to also protect people. Instead of Uber and Lyft gutting, labor laws in California, which they just did and successfully, you have to give people healthcare. You have to give them basic, protect insurances if they have to buy their own equipment and vehicle. These things are just being gutted left and right. So my critique is that, by making everyone an automatized unit, everyone's like an island now. You have to buy your own gear and you are a company. And that kind of appeals to some sort of like degree of rugged American individualism. But in doing so, it's just like put people, live more and more living paycheck to paycheck and not being able to make their rent.
Right. It's this false premise that the American dream, as you said, that rugged individualism that is sold to us, when reality it's just, exploitation.
Yes.
Yeah. Another aspect, so you're multi-hyphenated in this film. You also composed the score. Could you tell us a little bit about that and your musical background?
Yeah, it's something I like to do. I don't really consider myself much of a like accomplished or taught composer, but I have composed the score for all of my documentaries and now this film, and I do it on Logic, and I do it all by ear.
Hmm.
Not Logic like the way of thinking, the software
Great.
program Logic.
Yeah.
I just use Logic, and I think
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Doesn't everyone? That's how you write.
like this has got to be
Yeah,
super,
write the notes out. Yeah.
no, I enjoy doing it. It's like part of the editing. It's fun to do it while we're editing because I'm editing the film. I see what's needed, where we need score, and then I can go off and do that instead of having to wait for someone else to do it. So I would like to collaborate with people at some point probably, but this
Sure.
was such a scrappy project. It helped us, save money and keep going by having me wear a few different hats.
Absolutely. Out of all those different hats with writing, directing, editing, composing, and whatnot, which one do you prefer the most? What was the most gratifying for the filmmaking process for you?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess I purely like being a director. I love being on set, and I love collaborating with people that way. So collaboration is incredibly important. The editing process is interesting because what I try to do is I try to turn myself off as the director of the film and treat myself have an orthodoxy, like I'm just an editor who's come in and I've found all this footage,
Mm,
and I have great producers around me, Taylor Hess, Joe Varka, Jesse Miller, and they kind of become like the creatives, and I'm the editor. And
mm.
yes, I have of course my opinions and everything, but I show cuts to them, get their feedback, work on it, and so I try to get a little distance at first in the process by leaning on my producers. So I purely feel like directing is my jam, and the other things I like to do too a little bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. It is a fantastic film. I really loved it, and wish you all the best. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much again. I appreciate it, and thanks for programming it.
Absolutely, my pleasure.